loneliness is an epidemic on the scale of obesity and smoking. Like it's actually a major physical problem. And I look around at other lives around me and just not even on the medical level, but on the spiritual level, I feel like the difference between the people who make it and the people who don't is not hard things. Like we all have hard things. We all struggle with mental illness and tragedy and suffering and sickness and relationship issues. But the people who walk alongside friends in those things, I see persevering and enduring and eventually going closer to the Lord. And the people who walk along in those things alone, I see falling away from life, from marriage, from work, from God. And so friendship is a make or break issue.
Hey, my name is Kat Lee, and welcome to the Hello Morning Show, where it's my goal to help you build life-changing daily routines. Now, today we're talking about fighting the drift of isolation and learning to build life-giving friendships. We're joined by Justin Whitmel Early, the author of The Common Rule, Habits for the Household, and his new book, Made for People. We discuss how we can prioritize our friendships when life is busy and vulnerability is hard. Let's get started. Justin, thank you so much for being on the Hello Mornings podcast. For those of my listeners who have not been introduced to you, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of your origin story kind of in general, and then specifically what led you to write Made for People.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna give you like the 90-second high flyover, and then
You
you
can
can
go,
push in
yeah,
on
that sounds
you
good.
can push in on any of that you want because I'm liable to talk like half an hour about any of these sentences. But I graduated from college in 2006, where I met my wife Lauren, and I lived in China almost for 5 years as a missionary until I felt called actually by the Lord to enter the vocation of law and business. And I went at that with all the fervor of a missionary on a call. And my life actually, I did really well in law school and got like my dream job in mergers and acquisitions. But my life really fell apart my first year of lawyering into anxiety and panic, which was very unlike my previous life. And I realized after a long slog of struggling through this that I had been formed into a very different person internally by the habits of American life, and particularly lawyering and law school, which sort of woke me up for the first time in my life. I was about 30 years old to the idea that habits form us spiritually, deeply. And that led to my first book, The Common Rule, which is on the spirituality of habit, which I had two kids in law school. After The Common Rule came out, I suddenly realized I should probably apply all this habit and spiritual formation stuff to my family of now four boys. So my second book was on habits of the household and really how spiritual formation happens in rhythms of the family. And I say that because my first two books came out of crisis. I've always loved to write, even when I was a missionary in China, I was always writing. But my first two books came out of the crisis of the Lord waking me up to something that I really needed to work on. This third book, Made for People, is a little bit different because, on the one hand, I have been blessed really ever since high school. I feel like the Lord has brought deep friendships into my life, not without a lot of work and a lot of forgiveness and pain and reconciliation and all that. But I've walked alongside close friends for and different ones over the periods for many years now. And I've just realized, honestly, Kat, that I wouldn't be walking with the Lord the way I am now or on any given day without friends beside me who have really pushed me towards God. So this book comes out of blessing, and yet there's a crisis on the other side because I'm looking at the world, and not just post-pandemic, really this started happening pre-pandemic, where we are now hearing in five alarm, fire language that we're dying earlier because of our loneliness. Loneliness is an epidemic on the scale of obesity and smoking. Like it's actually a major physical problem. And I look around at other lives around me and just not even on the medical level, but on the spiritual level, I feel like the difference between the people who make it and the people who don't is not hard things. Like we all have hard things. We all struggle with mental illness and tragedy and suffering and sickness and relationship issues. But the people who walk alongside friends in those things, I see persevering and enduring and eventually going closer to the Lord. And the people who walk along in those things alone, I see falling away from life, from marriage, from work, from God. And so friendship is a make or break issue. And I really wanted to write about it in a spiritual context. That was longer
Um,
than 90 seconds, but that was
no,
my
that's
answer.
That's great. I'm here for great answers, not timed answers. So I
Good.
love I love one word in particular that you mentioned
hmm
that I don't think we often necessarily associate with friendship, or in our ideal world we don't, and that's work. And you just talked about how
Yes.
you really worked for friendship. And I think in our heads, we often think friendship is something that just happens on the playground. Friendship is something that you just fall into. Can you speak a little bit about the
hmm
work of friendship?
Yes. That's so good. I'm like, oh man, this is a really important question. Because like love and marriage, anybody that experiences it knows that there's sort of like a two sides of this coin thing. That like there is a sudden rush of feeling and like, oh my gosh, I can't control this. Like I really like this person. I love this person. You fall in love, and I get why we say that. But anybody who does marriage or even a relationship for a couple months realizes, oh my gosh, I also really don't like this person. This is also very hard. Also, my feelings have completely changed since yesterday. And so we know when we think well about this stuff that love is a choice. Love is a set of actions. Love is a commitment over the long term. More, and really that's the leading point of it. And feelings can grow out of the commitment. Relationships are extremely, similar, and friendships are very similar. Like with all my friends, I have something I very much like, even love about them. But anybody we meet, there are sparks of interest and disgust, repulsion and fascination. The difference between a friend and anyone else is that you actually stick with them after getting to know them. And anybody who reads the book will read very early on my working definition of friendship, which is someone who knows you fully and loves you anyway. And there's a deep spiritual side of that about why that's imitating the life of Christ. But it's work because you have to stick around in friendship. And friends, relationships in our modern moment and are more like disposable cups than anything else. I mean, we use them for as long as they feel useful, and then quickly, at the first sign of difficulty, offense, a fight, we're like, well, let's move on. And that is no way to live, because everybody who thinks about it for a minute knows like the good life is on the other side of relational work. You fight through the hard things in marriage because marriage is beautiful when you work hard with it. And so is friendship, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally speak to that myself. There have been specific moments in different friendships when
Mm,
I felt hurt or left out. And in that moment, my natural tendency was to say, I'm just going to back away because that gives me some safety. That
yeah,
builds a wall. But
yeah,
the choice to do the work of pressing in and being like, you know what, that's fine. They can have a friendship. I feel left out, but I'm still part of this bigger friendship. And so, just I think we can forget that it's work and that it's a choice to
yes.
build friendships, but it's also a choice to find friends. I think post pandemic, there have been so many people who are now working from home who maybe have lost touch with their church community. And I feel like I hear from a
Mhm.
lot of women who were kind of in a community and could naturally find and form friendships, but now it's a little bit harder. Maybe they've retired, maybe they've just had kids and they're home now. What are some habits or just even ideas that people can implement to find friends? Because friendship doesn't come naturally to everyone. And,
Yes.
how do we even find friends?
Oh, you bet. Let me, I'm gonna, you said it. You said you're here for good answers, not just short ones.
Yes.
So I'm gonna back up 1 second in order to get to that answer of how do we find friends? Because what you just said, it's not necessarily natural that like we find ourselves in relationships. It's also not natural that we push through relationships as we just talked about. And I think there's a commonality here that I just want to note. My claim is that the drift of American life is to become busier, wealthier people who used to have friends. And that's just to say that, like, sociologically, if you look at what happens to people after high school and college, because sometimes there's a countercurrent in high school and college where similar activities or dorm life or whatever you had might push you towards people in a very unique and beautiful way. It's like summer camp. You look back and you're like, the structure of life pushed me into relationship, and that was a beautiful thing. And some of our brightest memories are from those kinds of times. The current of the normal American life is to drift away from those things. And so you're exactly right, Kat. Like part of the fight, and which is why this book is called Why We Drift into Loneliness and How to Fight for a Life of Friendship, is to make choices that help us beat against that current and swim upstream. And similarly, when we, even if we make it to those relationships, the current of those relationships is to throw them away as soon as they get hard. And yet we know from the way that Jesus acts to us is that when things get hard or risky or capable of wounding him, he pushes in. He doesn't run away. And so there's a spiritual direction here that says when we fight to go farther and farther into relationship, instead of accepting the current to drift away and out of them, we're doing something holy. We're actually acting like Jesus, who is the consummate friend of John 15, who has greater love than this than someone who lays down their life for a friend. So it is of great spiritual import that we think about this question that you just asked. How do we build habits to actually put ourselves in the way of that? And there's a million, but let me give you just a couple. One, I would really encourage people to think about the geography of friendship. You you are going to be friends with people who you can actually see in embodied ways. So if you're in a new town or at a new church, I would start to think about where are the places that I exist already? What school are your kids going to? Or what activities are you doing? Or what church are you going to? And say, these are probably the locations of relationship. And I actually want to work on those. Alternatively speaking, if you're younger and you're listening to this and you have a move coming up, I'd like raise my hand and say, my wife and I during law school chose to like turn down the best jobs in bigger cities in favor of moving to Richmond, where I live now, which had less jobs and less high paying jobs, but we knew we'd live immediately next to friends. And we wanted to put ourselves in a countercurrent of saying, how about we let friends determine our geography and let work come out of that? Not everybody should do that. And if you're living in a place that's not like that, you shouldn't regret it. But I'm just saying there's a way of thinking about place that actually puts relationship forward. And then I just add this one habit, and that is I like to think of friendship like an hour a week. And what I mean by that is my claim is that friendship will make or break your life, physically and spiritually. If you think about everything else that's necessary for physical survival and spiritual thriving, there are things you got to do all the time. You need to sleep probably at least 7 hours a day. You need to eat and work and parent way more than that. You should be praying without ceasing. If you're a believer, like you should be spending time regularly in the Word. Like all these things have to happen all the time. But friendship is uniquely powerful in that 1 hour of it a week, even sometimes every other week, will completely change the dynamic of everything else. So, Kat, for like my two best friends and I, Steve and Matt, we get together once every other week on Tuesday evenings and just sit for about an hour or two. Probably averages out to an hour a week. So we do 2 hours every other week. And we just do this radical thing called telling the truth, where we update each other on our lives and tell our secrets, but also we laugh and joke and talk about our kids and wives and jobs and everything. And those evenings completely changed the rest of my experience of life. But they would not happen without the saving power of a schedule. I mean, we literally all expect, hey, every other Tuesday night, this is what we're going to be doing. And anything that's that important in life, you schedule. You expect to eat roughly 3 times a day. You expect to go to church once a week, or you expect to show up at work Monday through Friday. Important things you schedule. And friendship is no different. You should actually like think about what's my rhythm of a relationship. And it's an incredibly powerful mechanism to keep you pushing into what you would otherwise drift away from.
I love that. I love that phrase, rhythm of relationship. And, you mentioned kind of like in college, we're sort of forced into relationship. I have two college kids and we're about getting ready to
Mhm.
move them back to school. And,
Yeah.
I hear every week about this new thing they're trying. Hey, mom, I'm going to try out the business school today because they have free food. And then they go and they meet people and they get free
Yeah.
food.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's just so many different environments. And so we can be intentional and imagine in our own community, what's college like? Like, what's a new thing I can try? What's a new club I can
Mhm.
join? And I'm just going to put a little plug in here for this is going to make me sound old, but for pickleball. Have you heard of pickleball? It's like, it's kind of,
My family's obsessed right now with pickleball. And
Yeah, me
I'm about to
too.
play it for the first time, Kat, when we all go on vacation together in 10 days. But like I
Okay.
see my mom hanging out with like new people and making new relationships
Yes.
because of the rhythm of pickleball in her life, which
Yes.
is amazing, you know?
I laughed at it for so long because I grew up playing tennis, but now I have like friends. Like I will be on a court with an 84-year-old woman, a Baylor football player, and a college professor, and we're having a blast. And so I just
Yes.
feel like it's unique. It's actually uniquely designed to help people meet people in a way that is unusual because literally no matter your skill level, if you can move, you can get on a court.
Yes. You
So
bet.
yeah, just kind of creating that college environment. Like, how can I replicate that in my day-to-day life and look for those things that make college unique, like geography?
Yes. And I would add on to that. So you should think about like what are these geographic locations of friendship or the shared activities that put you in the way of people? And that's just a wonderful discipline. It's the difference between somebody who just stays in their house and wishes they had a relationship and somebody who's out there getting scraped up in the world, at least trying. And
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, even when you're trying and failing, you'll be happier than when you're not trying at all. But I would also add C.S. Lewis has this wonderful essay on friendship. If you've never read it, anybody who's listening should. It's in the Four Loves where he talks about the four classic ways of understanding love in the classical thinking. So there's like, there's eros, sexual love. There's caritas, the love of sort of like a platonic love. There's the agape, the way that God loves us. But there's phileos, which we call brotherly love or friendship, right? And that was a long introduction just to say he has this wonderful essay on friendship. And one of his famous lines from it is that friends are the people who happen to be, doing the same thing, let's say like pickleball, and then are maybe like talking after the match. And they're like, wait, you like fantasy literature too? And they have this, what he calls the U2 moment, where two companions, he calls it, suddenly realize they have similar interests that they thought was only theirs. And before now, they're like, I'm the only person in the world, but they're like, oh, you too, like pickleball and these fantasy novels, and and you could substitute any two common activities, right? But there's what I love about C.S. Lewis's way of describing it is there's a turn from companions who look out at the same thing to each other. And I think one of the habits that I want to encourage people towards is getting good at making that turn. Like it's one thing to get together for coffee and like talk about the weather and the gossip at the pickleball courts or at church or like about your colleagues or something. It's a entirely different thing to get together and make that turn where you say, what is inside of you
Mm.
that I can relate to, which is more about vulnerability and disclosure of self. And I think that whether that means, schedule a coffee after the morning run routine that you have with somebody else, or make sure like after band practice you go out for food and talk or something like that. Like just scheduling, make a habit of putting those times that cause you to turn towards each other instead of just looking out on an activity. That's where friendship
Mm.
emerges out of companionship, because companions can play pickleball together, but friends are the people who eventually look at each other and say, tell me about you and let me disclose myself. And that's where really the beautiful life starts to happen.
I love that. And that actually ties in with an experience that I had. We had friends that would come and play together. And then I think we just needed a fourth one day and we found each other and we just started playing regularly. And then we did something that you actually mentioned in the book. And that when you mentioned it in the book, I thought, oh my goodness, all of my dearest friendships have done this. And that's you talked about just naming things. And so, like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so we audaciously call ourselves the PB pros as if we're professional level, but that's just what we named ourselves. And that's what our chat is.
Yes.
So if I go out to dinner with them, my kids will be like, oh, are you going out with the pros today? I'm like, yeah, I'm going out with the pros today. And there's just something
That's so
truly
fun.
powerful about, we got together just in a place where we were doing the activity together. Then we looked to one another where we would, play together and then chat or go out to dinner. And now we've named ourselves so that we're really
Mhm.
doing life together. What are some other ways that we can take a friendship from the normal, maybe see you out in the world kind of level and the casual level to a deeper friendship?
Yes, I think it has to do entirely with the power of words. So It doesn't have to be giving the text chain a name or calling yourselves, the besties or the resties or something, but it does have to do with words. If you think about it, God created the world through words, right? He spoke reality into existence. And then he went on in Genesis 2 to tell Adam to name the world. He passed on that creative power to Adam and said, "You name the world, you create new realities." And so when we do that, when we name things, we're actually exercising a holy power that creates real realities, which is one way of saying our words are powerful. Now, bring that to bear in relationships. For example, I often tell about a friend about 5 years ago. We were talking on our front porch. We did not know each other that well. We had met a couple times, but we were hanging out one evening. And this friend, I remember at one point was like, we've got I feel like we have a lot in common, a lot of similar passions. We should lean into this. We should do this more often. That statement, and I don't even remember exactly what he said, but that small gesture of commitment, we should do this more often. We should lean into this, completely changed our relationship because it was like he named that something was different here. And it was that you too moment. Hey, we have something that's, you think like me. It's one thing to experience that. It's a totally different thing to name it in the world. And people feel that when you name, hey, we four are kind of a thing. We should do this. And we can go on to talk about cliques and how we need to keep circles open. But
Mhm.
but for now, like to name friendship is to say something incredible. It's to say that you and I are different than me and the rest of the world. And I want to lean into that. And so maybe you're naming the relationship, or maybe you're just signaling it. But it's always a gift to the person on the other side of the conversation. And commitment is one of the greatest things we can do, even when they're just little small gestures of commitment, like, hey, let's do this more often. So I'd encourage people just to use their words and name realities like that.
I love that. That is very scary to do, though. And I'd
It
love to hear your thoughts on how can we build our friendship with Christ and our relationship with him so that we are secure in him and not pursuing friendships in place of him, and we have the courage, because after I spent time with Jesus, or I've been worshiping, or I just feel so much more confident. I feel more secure in who I am in him, and I can go out and I just want to love on people. I'm more than happy to go and pray for perfect strangers. But when I've just been like navel gazing, I'm terrified to ask anybody for anything. So, how can we strengthen our relationship with the Lord and build habits with him so that we have the courage to go out and do
Yes.
scary things like name friendships?
Oh, this is so good. Okay, so I think this is a reciprocal endeavor of belief and practice. And if you're like looking at me here and now, I'm like making my hands twirl like a DNA spiral because there's a side of belief and there's a side of practice, and both of them encourage each other. So I would say on the belief side first, the more that we theologically understand Jesus as the true covenant friend, the more we will be encouraged to do this. And so by that, I just mean one of the ways that Jesus describes what he did for us in salvation, this is John 15, was saying that I don't call you servants, I call you friends, because everything the Father has told to me, I've told to you. And I'm going to lay down my life for you. I choose you. Okay. And you can pick, there's so many beautiful things in that passage, but two things are really clear. Jesus is vulnerable with us. He discloses what he's heard from the Father to us. So he's literally like good friends do, they talk, right? But even more so, he's vulnerable to the point of commitment. And actually, the Latin root of the word vulnerable means to be capable of being wounded. And that is 100% in play here with Jesus. Like he's going to die the next day, right? So Jesus makes himself vulnerable to us and then commits to us. And when we understand that, it's like, oh, when we are vulnerable to other people, let them into our lives and see them commit to us, we experience a real flash of the gospel. And when we do that to other people, see them in their vulnerable state and yet commit to them anyway. And sum this up in like my definition of friendship earlier, right? To be truly known and loved anyway by somebody else. This is where you see that friendship is a holy thing.
Mm.
But it's one thing to know that. And so you should study John 15. You should meditate on that. You should think about that the God of the universe actually counts you a friend, which is different than saying he respects you. Like, I imagine if I met the president, he would respect me. But to say that I'm friends with the president is entirely different, you know? Um, so knowing that is significant. But here's the thing, Kat, you don't really know something until you practice it, like, or you experience it and you try it out. Like, to know that honey is sweet is boring. To taste honey is incredible, you know? So when we actually go out and try friendships like this, make ourselves known, capable of being wounded, and then love each other anyway. And that happens in the series of relationships when you forgive and get hurt and try again and tell your secrets and realize that everybody's a sinner, including your friends, you know, and you. We actually then start to realize, oh my gosh, that amazing feeling with this person when we made it through a fight, or they like knew my trauma and tragedy and loved me through it. That's what Jesus is doing for me. And suddenly it comes alive again. And that's why I twirl my hands and say this belief and practice needs to be intertwined. So we have to understand it, but we also have to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And we should do both of those our whole life. And friendship with God and others just gets better and better, even though it's harder and harder.
I love that. I recently experienced at a deeper level the power of friendship. I was in a unique experience where we went overseas and we were gone for 6 weeks. My husband was the only one that spoke the
Okay.
language. And so for 6 weeks, I had the option of speaking to my husband, my son, and my daughter. And I couldn't communicate with anyone else. I felt like a complete idiot. I couldn't even tell them I don't really speak your language very well because I kept forgetting the words. But I had Voxer, which is an app on your phone that you can
Mhm.
talk with friends on. And I have a couple friend groups where we talk on Voxer, and it was such a lifeline for me. I mean, I love
Mm.
my husband and my kids, but it was such a lifeline
That's right.
for me to have that friendship in the midst of literally not being able to communicate with the world around me.
Hmm.
And I don't think I treasured those friendships, but I treasure them at a new level now, recognizing just the importance of community and friendships at all levels when you don't have even communication with people. And
Yeah.
so this is just such a timely topic for me because I see how vital it is. And I think there's so many people in our country right now that are living a life that's kind of like they're overseas. They don't have
Oh, wow.
communication with other people. They don't have a relationship. They don't know the words. They don't know how to build these friendships. And I think the power of your book is just the intentionality of it, the intentionality of understanding the importance of friendship, being purposeful about
Mm.
friendship. And then you talk about covenant friendship. And I don't think that, honestly, I live in a very, I feel like, rich community with rich friendships and rich
Hmm.
churches. But I haven't really heard that phrase before. But I love your concept of it. I love the intentionality of it. And so I'd love for you to introduce us to the phrase and what it looks like in your life and what it can look like in ours.
Yes. My hope in introducing this term covenant friendship was to give a gravitas or like a re-enchantment of the concept, because the word friend has been abused over the past decades, probably even century.
Mark
So
Zuckerberg.
yeah, I don't blame him exclusively, but you know, friend is now something you can do with a click online. You know, friend is a verb on Facebook. So not to blame Facebook. Really, this concept has been falling apart actually over I'd probably say the past century. So even when C.S. Lewis wrote the essay I mentioned earlier, and that was in the 1940s, I believe, he he would have said the modern world has completely forgotten what the ancients regarded as one of the highest virtues of life. And this is true. So you can go back and you can read Aristotle or Cicero. You can look at Jesus's, claim in John. You can look at letters between friends, same-sex friends who, like, the ancients are talking about it as like this soaring part of life, friendship. Aristotle said that the life without friends is not worth living, for example. Abraham Lincoln and his friend Joshua Spee wrote to each other the way that we would imagine lovers writing to each other now. Like, I miss you, I love you. And people are reading these and be like, are they really just friends? Yes, because up until circa 100 years ago, people thought in terms of this language that friendship is one of like the diamonds of existence. Okay. But now we think of friends as a nice to have at best. And even strong people of faith in the church would think, it's me and God, or it's me and my wife or husband and God, it's my kids first, family first. And I just want to get in there and say, you can't be a great husband until you also have male friends helping you be a good husband. And you can't be a great wife until you have female friends helping you be a good wife. And by the way, your children need to see you interacting with other people, because put yourselves in a island where you don't speak the language of anybody else, kind of like the example you mentioned. And it gets hard when it's just us, but we are made, this is the title of the book, we are made for people. We're made to experience this diamond of relationship called friendship. And when I think the word needs to be reclaimed if we in all its biblical significance, which is why I say covenant friendship. And covenant friendship is just a way of distinguishing this spiritual mode of friendship from community writ large. For example, I'm in a wonderful community here at my church in Richmond, Virginia. And I love these people. I respect them. I see them on Sundays. I'm in parish group or small groups with many of them. We work together and volunteer together and do all these things. But not all of them really, really know me, because not many people can know you that deeply. And if they don't know me that deeply, they can't do that second part of friendship, which is love me anyway, despite my flaws. We do a little bit of that, at the church level, but the depth of it can only be experienced in smaller modes. So what I like to tell people about covenant friendship is it's a mode of friendship that you really actually can't have that many, but everybody needs a few. And so what I'm not talking about is that you need to go out and have, 20 incredible friends, maybe not even 5 or 10, but one, two, or three, absolutely. Everybody needs a couple people who just really knows them really well. And these are also not marriages. I mean, you can move through these in different phases of life, whether you move away or you just are not that close to a person anymore. Don't I want to encourage you that there might be something to lament there, but it doesn't have to be guilt there. Like, it's natural to move in and out of friendships in a way that it's not to move in and out of marriages. You can have a lot of friends. You can lose a lot of friends over the course of your life and still be really healthy and normal. That's not true for marriage. You lose a ton of marriages, everybody's gonna be like, well, something's going on here. Friendships are different, but everybody needs a couple friends, and I would call them covenant friends, both to signal that sort of Jesus-like knowing fully and loving anyway, and to signal that they're people with that you do kind of make a promise to on some level, that you do signal, hey, even when things are hard, I'm here for it and let's work through it. That, I think, re-enlivens and re-enchants friends to what we were made to experience. And we desperately need that right now, because literally we're dying without it.
Mm-hmm. As you talk about that in, C.S. Lewis and Aristotle terms, I'm over here thinking about Anne of Green Gables. I know you have 4 boys, but maybe you've heard of Anne of Green Gables. It's really
I'm
big
vaguely
among,
aware. It's been a long time though
yeah,
since my
yeah.
sisters were reading it when I was little.
You could get some big sister, maybe wife points if you read the books, watch the movies. But
Yeah.
there are 2 main characters, and that's, 2 characters, Anne and Diana. And Anne is this very passionate, dramatic girl, and she calls Diana her kindred spirit and her bosom friend, and just all these
Mm-hmm.
phrases that we wouldn't use today. But the depth of their friendship is something that you're kind of alluding to, and it's just a deeper, more committed level of friendship than we kind of throw around today.
Absolutely. You see it in great novels like this. I think of Little Women, actually, just a wonderful story. And of course, these are sisters bearing together, but often I think I see a lot of covenant friendships coming out of family relationships too. It's not a given, but it's a beautiful thing. And I think paying attention to this is actually important, because any good storyteller knows that we want to see heroes with people by their side, that heroes are not solitary individuals. And when we look at writers writing classic works that endure, and we see, Sam having Frodo, or Goose having Maverick in Top Gun, or like even like Dory and Marlin in Nemo, you see, oh, storytellers know this, which means, and storytellers at best understand the human heart, which means that's in your heart too. Like, who isn't longing for a Goose or a Dory or a Sam by their side to help make life beautiful?
Mhm.
And when you like look back to those childhood stories and see that, oh, one of the things that made this story beautiful was friendship. And often one of the parts that makes stories tragic is the loss of friendship. And that should just be a signal to us of how important it is.
Absolutely. And the hard thing is in today's society, we are very busy. We are not always geographically close. Like I was overseas and my friends were here.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
how can we use technology? Technology can definitely isolate us, but how can we use technology to build our friendships and deepen them?
I love this question because I think technology can be really helpful in relationships. And if anybody's read my prior writing, that's a little bit surprising because I have no problem railing against the ills and evils of technology. One of my key habits in life is scripture before a phone, like making sure that you're not looking at your phone first thing in the morning. One of my other key habits is putting your phone away for an hour every evening so that you actually have time to be present with people. And yet, I can have all these problems with technology and still recognize that my text chains with my friends are some of the most fun and funny parts of my life. Like we just have tons of communications. I could pick up my phone right now, probably see 20 or 30 of, you know, political debates, updates, funny GIFs or memes, prayer requests, scripture encouragements, questions, like all these things flying around. And what I want to note is that it's actually an incredible way, and think of this as closed group chats or text chains. I'm not talking about social media where you're
Right.
potentially talking to just anyone. I'm talking about a curated chain. So let's just use text chain as like the easiest example of people in a relationship that are giving updates about their lives. This is a really good thing because it means when we do get together, we have like, oh yeah, I heard about the panic attack you had last Tuesday, and I prayed for you when you sent that text message. Tell me more about what happened. It allows us to turn to each other more quickly, like we talked
Hmm.
about after the pickleball game or after the run, to say, hey, you said your grandmother was sick, or hey, you said your teenager was going through this. It's a great way to be updated. But Kat, the big caution I would give is that is predicated on the idea that we're regularly getting together as bodies. Like I said, maybe following that sort of 1 hour a week rule or rhythm of relationships. Because I would say technological relationships are snacks. Okay. Embodied relationships are meals. And the difference is intuitive there, right? If you eat only snacks, then you feel full, but you're not nourished. And we know what happens to our body when we do that. If we subsist largely on technological relationships, we will actually feel like, oh, we're in a relationship, but we're not nourished by that vulnerability and commitment that happens in deep embodied relationships. So I would strongly encourage people to appreciate the goodness of a healthy snack. It bridges you to the next meal, and it's great. Like I love guacamole, but I'm not going to live on it because like it's not sufficient for the whole diet, right?
Right.
So embodied meals, like relationships are those, run to those, but use text chains for what they're good for. Social media is different. I would very much encourage people to understand that social media is marketing, not relationship. Text chains and closed group chats that can actually be relational, but it's just not the meal.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I am a big fan of technology. My friends, we all have, maybe a kid or two still at home. We have college kids, we have
Hmm.
work and business, and it's hard to get together, but we use, for us, Voxer in particular, to just,
Yeah.
talk literally throughout the day. And so then when we do get
Hmm.
together, we can go straight to deep topics, or we'll
Yes.
try to get away, once a year and just be together for a whole retreat. And it's in having that day-to-day communication, I think, just gives us a different level of
Absolutely.
relationship.
And I just add really quick to that, a practical tip for people is the more immediate and unvarnished the communication, the better for relationship. And there's actually studies on this. So it's not just my idea. Sherry Turkle, who a little over a decade ago wrote the like Lonely in a Crowd or something like that. I'll come back to it. She studied the way that college students interact. And one of the things that she noticed was they were increasingly preferring technologically mediated communications because they could curate and edit, right? I can, particularly on social media, I can take 20 shots and then pick my favorite. When you just are FaceTiming somebody, that's not the same. When you're actually in the room, it's very not the same. There's no editing, there's no hiding, there's no pausing. And so the closer you get to hearing voices in real time, talking on the phone, video chats, the closer you are to risk because you cannot edit and curate. And risk is what is happening in vulnerability. The real you is coming through, and that's not always the you that you like. And then your friends have to deal with the awkward parts of you, the difficult parts of you. That's what's so good about relationship. So just a practical tip is like lean into the forms of technology that are less editable, more immediate, and more risky, because that's where relationship happens.
I love that, but I have to say, two of my friends are going to use this against me whenever I recall a Voxer message that was like a verbal vomit. They're like, "Why did you recall that? You need to leave it." So, lesson learned, lesson learned. I'll leave
Yep.
it next time.
I'll let your friends call you out on that.
Justin, where can people get a copy of your book? Where can they find you online?
You can get a copy of my book anywhere from Amazon to, the brick and mortar bookstores that still exist if you're near Barnes and Noble or something. And you can find me online at justinwhitmelearly.com, or if you Google Justin Early author lawyer, you'll find me. I'm most active on Instagram if people sort of want to message or like see reels that I put up kind of describing short concepts from the book. And I would love to hear from you. I do try to respond to most messages, though sometimes it takes me some weeks to get back, but I would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the Hell Mornings podcast. Thank you really too for writing this book. I think it's so needed because we live in such a world of snack relationships and we need these deeper relationships and we need the push and the inspiration to go deeper too. And I don't think that's something that's often talked about. So thank you.
You're so welcome. And if one person messages me and say, "Hey, I leaned in and named a relationship because of this podcast," it'll be more than worth it. So I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks for your words.
All right, Hell Mornings community, that was a double dog dare right there. So somebody make that happen. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kat.
My name is Kat Lee, and I'm so thankful that you joined us for the Hello Mornings show today. I hope it inspired you to begin waking up for your life and not just to your life. I'll see you now in the next episode of the Hello Morning Show.
It's early in the morning, the house is quiet, but I've set aside this time for you. I bow before the throne of a noble king, and in this place my heart begins to sing. It's gonna be a God day filled with His grace and sweet news.